The ocean stretched endlessly before Emma Carter, an expanse of blue shimmering under the golden afternoon sun. She leaned against the railing of the small charter boat, inhaling the salty breeze. The trip was supposed to be a simple excursion, a few hours on the water, a break from her demanding job back in Miami, and a chance to clear her mind. The crew had greeted her warmly enough when she stepped aboard, their smiles reassuring, their words smooth and practiced. She never imagined that behind those smiles lay something darker, something dangerous. The boat rocked gently as it moved farther from the shore, the city skyline fading into the distance. Emma chatted briefly with the man who had taken her ticket, a tall figure with weathered skin and a sailor's cap pulled low. He introduced himself as Captain Ray, a name she doubted was real, but at the time, it didn't matter. She wasn't there to make friends, only to enjoy the ride. The deck was quiet. Besides Emma, there were only 3 others, 2 deckhands and another passenger, a young man who seemed strangely nervous, checking his phone repeatedly. She thought little of it. Her focus was on the ocean, the waves, and the peace she craved. For the first 30 minutes, everything felt normal. The crew adjusted ropes, joked among themselves, and handed out water bottles. Emma relaxed, watching gulls swoop low and dolphins leap in the distance. But then, slowly, the atmosphere shifted. The jokes stopped. The smiles faded. Conversations became whispers she couldn't quite hear. Her instincts prickled. Something was off. When the young man with the phone disappeared below deck with one of the crew, Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She reminded herself that she was overthinking, that she'd been stressed lately, and her imagination was running wild. But when she caught the captain staring at her, not with friendliness, but with calculation, her pulse quickened. "Everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He gave a tight smile. "Just fine, miss. Enjoy the water. Not everyone gets to see it like this." There was something in his tone she didn't like. Something final. Emma's hand curled around the railing, her knuckles white. She thought about retreating to the cabin, but before she could move, one of the deckhands stepped up behind her. His shadow stretched long across the deck, swallowing her own. "You know how to swim?" he asked casually, too casually. Emma's heart slammed in her chest. "Why?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he glanced at the captain, who gave the slightest nod. It happened in a blur. Hands shoved against her back, forceful and merciless. The world tilted, the deck vanished beneath her, and suddenly she was in free fall. The ocean hit her like concrete. The shock stole her breath, salt water flooding her mouth as she plunged beneath the surface. For a terrifying moment, she didn't know which way was up. Her arms flailed, legs kicking wildly until instinct propelled her toward light. She broke the surface with a desperate gasp, coughing and sputtering as waves slapped against her face. Above, the boat loomed, its white hull gleaming under the sun. Emma screamed, her voice raw and panicked. "Help! Somebody help me!" But the only response was laughter, low, cruel laughter that carried over the water. The crew stood at the railing, watching her thrash. The captain leaned on the rail, his expression unreadable, though his eyes glinted with something cold. "Good luck out there," he called, his voice mocking. Emma's heart clenched. They weren't going to pull her back aboard. They had meant for this to happen. She swam furiously, her strokes desperate, but the boat was already drifting away, its engine rumbling as it picked up speed. The distance grew with every passing second. Her arms burned, her lungs ached, and still she tried, unwilling to accept what was happening. The young man she'd thought was a passenger appeared beside the captain, no longer pretending to be one of the guests. He was part of them. Together they watched her fade into the distance, until finally the boat turned, heading farther out to sea, leaving her behind, alone. The realization hit her harder than the waves. Emma treaded water, the horizon stretching endlessly around her. The shore was gone, the boat gone, and there was no sign of another vessel nearby. Panic clawed at her chest. She screamed again, but her voice was swallowed by the vast emptiness of the ocean. Her mind raced. Why had they done this? Was it random cruelty? A twisted game? She tried to piece it together, but found no answer. All she knew was that she had been betrayed, abandoned, and left to die. The ocean was relentless. Waves lifted her one moment and dropped her the next, salt stinging her eyes and mouth. Her clothes, heavy with water, dragged her down. Every kick, every stroke, felt like a battle against an enemy that had no mercy. She flipped onto her back, floating as best she could, forcing herself to conserve energy. Tears blurred her vision. Fear screamed at her to give in, to let the ocean take her. But another voice fainter, steadier rose within her. She thought of her brother, a former Marine who had once spoken about Navy SEAL training. He had told her how those men endured nights in freezing surf, bodies battered by waves, refusing to quit. The ocean breaks the weak, he had said, but it makes the strong unstoppable. Emma clung to that memory like a lifeline. She whispered to herself over and over, "Don't quit. Not yet. Don't quit." Minutes bled into hours, the sun sinking lower in the sky. Her muscles screamed with fatigue. She felt small, insignificant, swallowed by the immensity of the sea. But through the haze of exhaustion, she spotted something in the distance movement on the water. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but as she blinked salt from her eyes, she realized it was real. A black inflatable boat skimmed across the waves, fast and purposeful. Shadows moved inside it, figures upright and alert. Her heart leapt. Was it rescue? Or another danger? Emma raised her trembling arm, waving frantically. "Here, I'm here." Her voice cracked, barely audible, but she screamed until her throat burned. The boat slowed. One of the figures lifted binoculars. For a moment, time froze. Then the vessel turned sharply, heading straight for her. Relief surged through her chest, though fear lingered. She didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but one thing was certain: someone had seen her. She was no longer invisible in the endless ocean. Emma floated, too weak to swim, praying the boat would reach her before darkness fell. What she didn't yet know was that the men aboard weren't ordinary rescuers. They were Navy SEALs in the middle of a training mission, and they had just spotted their new objective. And for the first time since being thrown overboard, Emma had a chance at survival. The ocean was not forgiving. It had no concern for Emma's fear, no sympathy for her exhaustion. The salt stung her lips, her eyes burned, and the constant rise and fall of the swells disoriented her. Hours had passed since she had been shoved from the boat, though she could no longer tell how many. The sun had sunk lower, its fiery glow stretching across the horizon. What had started as a brilliant day now seemed menacing, every shadow and wave conspiring to drag her under. Emma had grown up loving the water. As a child, she spent summers at the beach with her family, running across the sand, squealing when the surf chased her ankles. But this was different. The sea was no playful companion here. It was endless, indifferent, and terrifying. For the first time in her life, Emma felt how small a human could be in the face of nature's enormity. She treaded water, her muscles trembling, each kick weaker than the last. Her arms were heavy, her shoulders screened, and her breaths came shallow and sharp. She had stripped off her shoes earlier, hoping the extra buoyancy would help. Still, she felt the drag of her damp clothes pulling her downward. Every instinct urged her to thrash and fight the waves, but she remembered something her brother had told her once. Don't fight the ocean. Work with it, or it'll kill you. So she flipped onto her back, floating as best she could, staring up at the vast, painted sky. It felt unnatural, lying there exposed, but she forced herself to stay still, conserving energy. Her body rose and fell with the rhythm of the sea. It wasn't perfect. She still swallowed water, still sputtered when waves slapped her face, but it was survival. Her thoughts spun as the minutes dragged. Why had they done it? She had boarded that boat like any paying customer. She hadn't argued, hadn't provoked anyone. Was it a cruel joke that had gone too far? Or something darker, trafficking, maybe, or revenge she didn't understand. She replayed the image of the captain's cold eyes, the nod before she was pushed. There had been no hesitation in that gesture. They wanted her gone. Dead, the thought nearly broke her. Her family didn't even know where she was. She had told her parents she'd be spending the weekend catching up on work. They would never expect she was fighting for her life in the middle of the Atlantic. She imagined their faces when they realized she hadn't returned. The grief, the confusion, it was unbearable. Her throat tightened, tears mingling with the salt water on her cheeks. "Don't quit," she whispered. "Don't quit." Her brother, Matthew, had always been her anchor. A former Marine, he had endured his own share of impossible conditions. She remembered him telling stories half proud, half haunted of his time training with Navy SEALs. He described men who endured Hell Week, who carried boats on their heads until their necks bled, who locked arms in freezing surf for hours, daring the waves to break them. "They're different," he had said once, his tone reverent. "Most people panic when they're cold, wet, and exhausted. SEALs stay calm. They survive where others give up." Emma latched on to that memory like a life raft. If those men could endure the ocean's cruelty, maybe she could too. Maybe she could borrow some of that grit, if only for tonight. She repeated Matthew's words in her mind like a prayer. Stay calm. Survive. A gull screeched overhead, startling her. She turned her head, scanning the horizon. Nothing. No boat. No land. Just water in every direction. A shiver raced down her spine, despite the lingering heat of the sun. She imagined sharks circling below, drawn to her frantic movements. The thought made her chest constrict. She forced herself to steady her breathing, though every dark shape beneath the waves made her heart lurch. Her body began to betray her. Her legs cramped, her arms shook violently, and her vision blurred with spots. Each wave that rolled over her face felt like the one that would finally pull her under. She thought about surrendering, just letting go, letting the ocean take her. It would be easy. No more fear, no more pain. Just silence. But then she saw her mother's face in her mind. She heard her father's laugh. She remembered a promise she had made to herself years ago, that she would live boldly, not timidly. To give up now would be to betray them and betray herself. "No," she gasped, forcing her arms to move, forcing her chest to rise. Not yet. Time blurred. She couldn't tell if it had been minutes or hours, but then something shifted. A low rumble reached her ears, faint at first, carried by the wind. She strained to hear. It wasn't thunder, it was too steady, too mechanical. Her heart skipped. An engine. Emma lifted her head, scanning desperately. The horizon remained empty. She rubbed salt from her eyes, her vision straining against the dimming light. Then she saw something small, dark, cutting across the water with purpose. A boat. Hope ignited, fierce and burning. She waved her arm weakly, shouting with what little strength she had left. "Here, please, here." The wind stole most of her voice, but she screamed again, tears streaming down her face. "Help me." The boat drew closer. She could make out figures aboard, dark silhouettes, moving with discipline, scanning the waves. Her relief was tempered by fear. Who were they? Another crew like the one that had tossed her overboard? Or something else? One of the figures raised binoculars. Emma froze, praying they saw her. Seconds crawled by before the boat shifted direction, turning straight toward her. She almost sobbed with relief. Her strength was gone, but her will surged. She splashed the water with her hands, keeping her face above the surface, refusing to let the ocean take her just yet. As the boat approached, she caught glimpses of the men aboard. They weren't tourists, nor did they look like fishermen. They wore dark wetsuits, their movements sharp, efficient, practiced. The way they scanned the horizon, the way they carried themselves, it was unmistakable. These were no ordinary rescuers. Emma didn't know it yet, but she had been spotted by an elite Navy SEAL team in the middle of a training exercise. What to her seemed like a miracle was, to them, just another mission unfolding. Her body trembled violently, her lips numb from salt and exhaustion. But for the first time since being thrown into the ocean, Emma felt something powerful rise within her hope. The ocean still tried to claim her, waves crashing against her weary body, but she clung to that hope with everything she had. Someone had seen her. Help was coming. And perhaps, just perhaps, the nightmare was about to shift. The inflatable Zodiac cut across the water like a knife, its rubber hull bouncing effortlessly over the swells. The roar of its outboard engine was steady but muted compared to the ocean's voice. A team of 6 Navy SEALs rowed inside, their bodies relaxed yet alert, every movement disciplined from years of training. They were not tourists. They were warriors in the middle of a training evolution off the Florida coast, part of a long cycle of exercises designed to sharpen every instinct. Today's drill was supposed to be simple: long-range navigation, stealth approaches, and recovery maneuvers. Nothing about it suggested they'd be saving lives. Petty Officer First Class Mark Daniels, the team leader, sat at the bow, scanning the horizon through binoculars. He was 35, a man whose weathered features told stories of deployments he never spoke about. His jawline was sharp, his eyes steady and calculating. He had led missions in the Middle East, in jungles, deserts, and cities where survival was never guaranteed. Out here, in the open ocean, he was in his element. Behind him, Specialist Jonah "Bear" McLean adjusted the throttle. Bear was a mountain of muscle, his frame making the boat look smaller than it was. He grinned beneath the spray of salt water, loving the raw power of the sea. "Smooth ride today," he muttered to no one in particular. Daniels didn't respond. Something had caught his attention. At first, it was nothing, a faint flicker on the water, a ripple that didn't match the rest. He lowered the binoculars, then raised them again. He focused, adjusting the dial until the shape came into view. "Contact," he said quietly. His voice carried authority, though it was calm, almost casual. The others instantly shifted, their bodies straightening, eyes scanning. Years of training had taught them to react to his tone, no matter how subtle. "What have you got?" asked Lieutenant Ramirez, the team's second in command, his voice measured but sharp. Daniels didn't answer immediately. He was studying the figure bobbing between the swells, barely visible against the vast expanse of blue. It was small, frail, moving weakly. His gut tightened. "Not debris," he said finally. "We've got a swimmer, alone." For a moment, silence filled the boat. Then Bear cut the throttle, slowing them to a crawl. "Middle of nowhere?" Ramirez muttered. "That doesn't make sense." "Nothing about it makes sense," Daniels replied, lowering his binoculars. "But someone's out there. Looks like they're in trouble." The SEALs exchanged quick glances. They weren't the Coast Guard, and technically they weren't on a rescue mission. Their orders were clear: training only. But every man aboard knew that didn't matter. If someone was fighting for their life in the ocean, The SEALs weren't going to turn their backs. Daniels made the decision in an instant. We're going in. Standard recovery. Bear, hold position. Mason Torres, you're with me. 2 SEALs instantly prepared, pulling on fins and masks with fluid precision. They weren't just soldiers. They were masters of the water, trained to slip beneath waves like predators. As they readied, Ramirez asked the question on everyone's mind. How the hell does someone end up alone, this far out? Daniels didn't answer, not yet. His eyes narrowed on the figure. Whoever it was, they were weak, their movements slowing. They didn't have much time left. Let's find out, he said. The boat steadied, rocking with the swell. Then, without hesitation, Daniels and the others slid silently into the water. The ocean closed around them, cool and heavy. Daniels kicked powerfully, his body slicing through the surf with practiced efficiency. His mind flickered to Bud's training years ago, those endless nights in the freezing Pacific, where instructors had screamed at him to quit. He hadn't. None of them had. It was in those brutal moments that he'd learned how to master fear, how to let the ocean's rhythm carry him, instead of fighting against it. Now, those same lessons carried him toward the struggling figure ahead. Emma saw them before she fully understood. 2 dark forms broke the surface, moving toward her with incredible speed. For an instant, terror flared. Had the crew returned? Were these more enemies sent to finish her? But as they drew closer, she saw the confidence in their strokes, the calm precision in their movements. These weren't men coming to harm her. They were men trained to save her. Her body sagged with relief, even as another wave crashed over her, pulling her beneath. She thrashed weakly, lungs burning until strong arms caught her. A voice cut through the roar of the water, firm and grounding. You're okay. We've got you. Daniels surfaced with Emma, clutched securely against him. She coughed violently, gasping for air, salt water streaming from her lips. Her body trembled uncontrollably, every muscle screaming with exhaustion. Stay calm, he told her, his voice low but commanding. You're safe now. Just breathe. She wanted to reply, to ask who they were, but her throat was raw. All she managed was a broken whisper. They threw me. Daniels didn't press for details. Not yet. He exchanged a quick glance with Mason, who was already signaling toward the Zodiac. The boat powered forward, closing the gap. Back aboard, the SEALs lifted Emma carefully into the boat. She collapsed onto the rubber floor, coughing and sobbing in equal measure. Ramirez wrapped a dry towel around her shoulders, his normally stoic face softening. Easy, you're all right now. Emma's teeth shattered violently. Her lips were blue, her skin pale. Still, she forced the words out. The crew. They pushed me. Off the boat. Left me. The SEALs froze. Even Bear's grin disappeared. Daniels crouched beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. Slow down, he said. Who pushed you? The captain. And the others. I was a passenger. They laughed. Her voice cracked, a memory too raw. Daniels's jaw tightened. He didn't need the full story yet. He knew enough. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately tried to kill her. Where were they headed? He asked. Emma shook her head, tears streaking her salt-stained face. I don't know. Farther out, please. Don't let them. You're safe, Daniels cut in firmly. We'll take it from here. He stood, his decision immediate. What had started as a rescue was about to become something else entirely. His team hadn't just pulled a woman from the ocean. They had stumbled into an attempted murder. And Navy SEALs didn't ignore crimes, not when they unfolded on their watch. He turned to his men. Change of mission. We're tracking that vessel. The Zodiac roared to life once more, pivoting hard across the waves. Emma huddled in the corner, wrapped in the towel, watching the men around her. They weren't panicked, weren't confused. Every one of them moved with lethal precision, as if hunting predators on the open water was just another day's work. For the first time since being betrayed, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt the presence of men who ruled the water. The Zodiac sliced through the water, its engine humming as it surged forward. Spray misted the air, cooling the already chilled skin of Emma Carter, who huddled at the boat's edge beneath a coarse military blanket. Her entire body shook uncontrollably. She had never known exhaustion this deep, a bone-deep trembling that no amount of willpower could quiet. She was alive. That was the miracle. But survival came with its own burden. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the crew's faces, heard their laughter as they pushed her into the sea. The memory clung to her like salt water on her skin. Around her, the Navy SEALs moved with silent efficiency. None of them wasted words. Each man had a role, and they performed it without hesitation. It wasn't chaos, not even close. It was coordination, refined and rehearsed through countless missions. To Emma, they seemed like shadows, powerful and calm, as if the ocean itself answered to them. Daniels crouched beside her again, his posture steady, his presence grounding. "How's your breathing?" he asked, his tone more clinical than sympathetic. Emma swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. "Better," she rasped. Her throat was raw from salt water, but she forced the word out. Daniels gave a single nod, then glanced toward Ramirez, who was already scanning their digital chart, mapping currents and estimating the rogue boat's course. "We'll need details," Daniels said to her. "Anything you can remember. The vessel, the crew, their heading." Emma shook her head helplessly. I didn't see much. They shoved me before I could." Her voice broke. She clenched the blanket tighter, ashamed of the tears she couldn't stop. "Then we'll find them," Danielle said, not unkindly. "That's our job now." There was no doubt in his voice, no hesitation. Emma blinked at him. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt something resembling safety. These weren't men who hoped to save her. These were men who decided they would, and nothing in the ocean could stop them. The SEALs continued their preparations. Mason and Torres checked their weapons, ensuring their carbines were secured inside waterproof cases. Bear adjusted the radio, sending encrypted signals to base. Ramirez plotted the chase, calculating speeds and bearings with a precision born from both training and instinct. Based on her story, they weren't running random charters, Ramirez said quietly to Daniels. If they tossed her, they've probably done it before. Daniels's jaw tightened. He had seen too much of the world to underestimate human cruelty. Pirates, smugglers, traffickers, evil, or many faces. Whoever had targeted Emma had underestimated one thing, that the ocean was their hunting ground, but it was the SEALs' kingdom. "We intercept," Daniels said firmly. "No games." Bear chuckled from behind the wheel. "They won't know what hit him." Emma listened, her heart racing. The words intercept and no games sent a thrill of both fear and relief through her. She was safe, yes, but the thought of confronting the men who had tried to kill her made her stomach twist. Still, when she glanced at the SEALs, she knew the outcome was inevitable. These weren't men who let predators escape. As the Zodiac gained speed, Emma's mind drifted back to the water, to the moment she thought her life was over. She remembered floating on her back, whispering her brother's words, "Don't quit." And now, impossibly, she was here, breathing, alive. She looked at Daniels and wondered if he knew what he represented to her. Not just survival, redemption. Her gratitude was overwhelming. She whispered, almost too softly to be heard, "Thank you." Daniels didn't respond with words. He simply met her eyes for a brief moment, gave a small nod, and returned to scanning the horizon. For him, gratitude wasn't necessary. Duty was enough. The chase stretched on, the boat weaving through swells as the sun dipped lower. The world turned gold and crimson, painting the ocean in fire. Emma clung to the side, staring at the endless water. Every second stretched long, her nerves taut. Then Ramirez spoke sharply. "Vessel, 10 degrees starboard, bearing northeast." Emma jerked her head up. In the distance, barely visible against the horizon, a white hole cut through the waves. Her blood turned to ice. That was them. She would never forget the shape of that boat, the way it looked when it drifted away, abandoning her to die. Her breath caught. "That's it," she whispered, her voice trembling. The SEALs had already locked onto it. "Confirmed," Ramirez said. Daniel stood, his body balanced effortlessly on the rocking deck. "All right, here's how we do this. We close fast, come alongside. Mason Torres, you board first. Bear, keep us steady. Ramirez, cover rear. I'll move in with second wave." The men nodded. No one questioned. No one hesitated. Their trust in Daniels and in each other was absolute. Emma's pulse thundered. She had never seen such precision, such unity. These weren't just soldiers. They were a single organism, each man a part of something larger, something unstoppable. She pulled the blanket tighter, fear and anticipation warring inside her. The SEALs weren't planning to just chase the crew. They were going to confront them, to make them answer for what they'd done. The gap closed quickly. The rogue vessel was slower, heavier. Its crew hadn't noticed the approaching Zodiac yet, too busy drinking or laughing in their false confidence. Emma could almost hear their voices in her mind, taunting her, mocking her. "Range closing," Ramirez said. 500 yards, 400, 200. Emma held her breath. At 100 yards, the crew finally noticed. She saw their heads whip around, saw confusion ripple across their faces. They shouted to one another, scrambling on deck. But it was already too late. Daniels gave the order. "Move." The Zodiac surged forward. The SEALs readied themselves, their bodies steady, their eyes sharp. The crew on the rowboat fumbled, panicked, reaching for weapons they weren't skilled enough to use. Emma gripped the side of the Zodiac, her heart in her throat. She had thought her nightmare ended when she was pulled from the sea. But now she realized it was only shifting forms. The men who had tried to kill her were about to learn a truth they never expected, that the ocean didn't belong to them. It belonged to the men who ruled the water. As the gap shrank to nothing, Daniels crouched low, his hand steady on his weapon. His voice was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos ahead. "Board fast. End it clean." The Zodiac slammed alongside the larger vessel. Mason and Torres vaulted upward in perfect synchronization, landing on the deck with lethal grace. Shouts erupted, curses flying as the crew scrambled. Emma's eyes widened in awe. The rescue was over. The confrontation had begun. The collision between the Zodiac and the rogue vessel sent a deep metallic thud echoing across the waves. The smaller boat rocked hard, but the Navy SEALs held steady, their movements precise and fluid. Mason vaulted first, his boots striking the deck with a forceful thump, followed instantly by Torres. Both men rose from their crouch like predators, rifles raised, eyes cutting through the chaos. The rogue crew froze for a heartbeat, stunned by the sudden intrusion. And panic set in. One man lunged for a knife on the table. Another fumbled with an old pistol tucked into his waistband. But against SEALs, hesitation was death. "Down, now!" Mason barked, his voice thunderous. The command cracked like a whip, carrying the authority of a man who had stormed compounds and faced insurgents in far harsher arenas. Torres advanced, his carbine sweeping the deck. "Hands where we can see them." The men hesitated. They weren't seasoned fighters, only thugs who'd grown bold on open waters. Their confidence melted when faced with disciplined violence. But one crewman, the one Emma recognized as the leader, sneered. His sunburnt face twisted with arrogance. "You think you can just—" Before he finished, Daniels leaped aboard with Bear at his side. His weapon came up fast, centered on the leader's chest. "Try me," Daniels said coldly. The deck went silent. From the Zodiac, Emma clung to the rail, her knuckles white. She watched as the SEALs surrounded the crew. Everything moved so quickly, yet every action was deliberate. These weren't wild brawlers. They were masters of control. Ramirez kept his weapon steady from the Zodiac, providing overwatch. His eyes flicked constantly, checking blind spots, scanning for hidden threats. He gave Emma a short glance. "Stay low," he warned. She nodded, her heart hammering. The rogue crew shuffled, fear replacing defiance. One man dropped his pistol and raised his hands, eyes darting nervously. Another slid the knife away, muttering under his breath. The leader still glared, his jaw clenched tight. Daniel stepped closer, weapon unwavering. "You threw her into the water," he said. His voice was even, not a question but a statement. The leader smirked. "Should have let her sink." Emma felt her chest tighten, fury rising. She wanted to scream, to tell him what those words meant, how close she'd been to dying. But before she could speak, Daniels acted. In a swift, decisive movement, he shoved the man backward against the railing, pressing the barrel of his rifle to his chest. "You made one mistake," Daniels said. His voice dropped lower, dangerous, carrying the weight of every operation, every rescue, every justice he'd ever delivered. "You thought the ocean was yours. It isn't. It belongs to us." The man's smirk faltered. Bear moved in with plastic restraints, forcing the crew to their knees one by one. Mason and Torres cleared the deck, checking storage compartments, making sure no one else was hiding. Their efficiency was terrifying to watch. Within minutes, the chaos had transformed into order. Emma couldn't believe it. The men who had seemed untouchable, who had laughed while throwing her into the ocean, now knelt like scolded children under the watch of warriors. Daniel signaled to Ramirez. "Secure the perimeter. Call it in." Ramirez tapped his comms, his voice calm. "This is Ghost 2. Hostile vessel secured. 5 detainees. Civilian recovered. Requesting Coast Guard extraction." Static crackled back, followed by confirmation. Help was on the way. The leader tried one last attempt at defiance. He jerked forward, his restraints creaking, and spat at Daniel's boots. "You don't scare me. You'll hand us over, and we'll walk free. Nobody controls these waters." Daniel stared at him, unmoved. Then he crouched, bringing his face inches from the man's. His eyes were cold, his voice steady. "You're wrong. We control them. And tonight, you're done." The man swallowed, bravado faltering under the weight of Daniel's conviction. Emma felt a surge of something powerful, almost primal vindication. For hours, she had been prey, stripped of control, tossed aside like nothing. Now, watching the SEALs dominate the very men who had left her to die, she felt justice crashing over her like a wave. As the Coast Guard cutter approached on the horizon, the SEALs maintained control. The rogue crew sat restrained on deck, their heads bowed, stripped of power. The Zodiac floated alongside, the sea calm now, as if it too recognized the balance restored. Emma sat quietly, still wrapped in the blanket. Her body trembled less now, not from cold, but from adrenaline draining away. She kept staring at Daniels, at the way he moved, unshaken, every decision decisive. When he finally approached her, she forced herself to meet his gaze. "You didn't just save me," she said softly. "You made them pay." Daniels shook his head. "Justice isn't ours. We just make sure it finds them." But Emma disagreed. She knew justice when she saw it. The Coast Guard boarded soon after, their crew shocked at the scene laid out before them. Reports were taken, detainees transferred, evidence logged. The SEALs gave their statements with clipped efficiency, already shifting back into professional detachment. For Emma, though, the night would never fade. She had seen the ocean's cruelty, felt its hunger, and she had seen the men who ruled it push back against that darkness. As the cutter's engines roared and the rogue crew was taken below deck, Emma looked once more at the SEALs. They stood together on the captured vessel, silhouetted against the dying sun, steady as stone. She realized something profound. Surviving the ocean had been her battle. Defeating the men who thought they owned it had been theirs. And together, they had turned the tide. The captured vessel drifted in the twilight, its engines muted as the last glow of day gave way to night. The ocean, vast and unbroken, seemed to hold its breath. On deck, the restrained crew shifted uneasily, their wrists bound, eyes darting with the predator's defiance. The Navy SEALs stood guard with a composure that unnerved even the most stubborn of the prisoners. Mason and Torres moved with watchful precision, weapons slung but ready, their stances relaxed yet coiled like springs. Ramirez checked their coordinates, his voice calm over comes, while Bear monitored the horizon from the helm. Daniels crouched in front of the leader again. The man's face was twisted in a scowl, his arrogance not yet extinguished. Salt spray clung to his beard, and his eyes burned with something between hatred and desperation. "You think you've won?" The man spat. His words were thick with contempt. "The Coast Guard will take us, and we'll be back before the week is out. Men like us don't stay locked up." Daniels didn't flinch. His gaze was level, steady, cold. "Men like you think rules don't apply here. But out here, there are rules. Ours." Emma, wrapped in her blanket near the stern, listened intently. She hadn't spoken much since the Coast Guard had been called. The SEAL's calm had reassured her, but now, as the leader snarled his defiance, a chill crept down her spine. Would he be right? Would he slip through the cracks and return to terrorize others? Daniels seemed to sense her fear without looking. He leaned closer to the man. "Out here, strength isn't about who's cruelest. It's about discipline. It's about precision. And it's about never backing down when people like you prey on the weak. You broke the rules when you threw her into the water. And that means you answer to us now." The leader sneered. "You can't scare me with your speeches." Daniels's lips curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile, though his eyes remained sharp. "This isn't a speech. It's a lesson." At his signal, Mason pulled one of the restrained men up and marched him toward the bow. The man resisted, thrashing, but Mason's grip was iron. With one twist, he forced the thug against the railing, pinning him effortlessly. "This is control," Daniels said to the leader, his voice calm but hard. "See how fast he stopped struggling. That's because he understands. The water doesn't forgive. Neither do we." The leader's bravado faltered for the first time. Emma could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a recognition that his men, once so loud and mocking, were silent now under the weight of SEAL dominance. The night deepened, the horizon swallowed by darkness. The ocean was no longer painted in fiery hues, but cloaked in black, the stars beginning to scatter above. The rogue crew shifted nervously in the shadows, their defiance bleeding into fear. Bear called from the helm, his deep voice breaking the silence. "Cutter's ETA is 40 minutes. Until then, we hold position. Daniels gave a curt nod. Keep eyes out. They've got nothing left to lose. Emma stiffened at those words. Nothing left to lose. She remembered the laughter as they tossed her overboard, remembered the way the leader had smiled when she struggled against the current. If they had no reason to fear the Coast Guard, what might they do now in desperation? As if on cue, one of the restrained men suddenly lunged sideways, slamming his shoulder into Torres. The motion was clumsy, desperate, but enough to spark chaos. The leader shouted in his native tongue, urging them to fight. Emma's heart lurched. But the SEALs didn't panic. Torres twisted smoothly, flipping the attacker onto the deck with a sharp thud that rattled the boards. Mason pivoted, weapon raised, covering the rest of the prisoners. Daniels's voice cut through the night, sharp as a blade. Enough. The men froze. The one on the ground groaned, his cheek pressed against the wood as Torres restrained him again. Daniels crouched over the leader, his tone like steel. You don't rule here. Every second you resist only proves how small you really are. Out here, you're not hunters. You're prey. Emma shivered. She had seen power used cruelly before, but this was different. The SEALs weren't brutal for the sake of it. They were controlled, exact, their authority rooted not in fear, but in dominance earned through mastery. Minutes stretched into an eternity as the vessel drifted. The prisoners were subdued, but tension clung to the air. Emma watched Daniels, trying to understand him. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a force, as steady as the tide. She edged closer, her voice quiet. What happens if the Coast Guard can't hold them? Daniels glanced at her, then at the restrained crew. His expression didn't change. Then we make sure they never touch these waters again. Emma believed him. Every word carried the weight of truth. The leader tried one final jab, his voice dripping venom. You think you're protectors, but you're killers. Same as us. This time, Mason answered, his voice low and firm. Difference is, we kill to protect. You kill for pleasure. That's the only line that matters. The crew fell silent again. Even Emma sat back, stunned at the simplicity of the statement. It was the first time she truly understood what separated these men from the criminals before her. When the Coast Guard's floodlights finally appeared on the horizon, sweeping across the water, Emma exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Relief washed over her, but alongside it came awe. For nearly an hour, she had witnessed what it meant to stand under the protection of the Navy SEALs. The prisoners stiffened, their false confidence draining as the cutter drew near. The ocean, once their playground, had turned into their prison. Daniels looked at Emma as the Coast Guard hailed them. Lessons over, he said simply. Emma nodded, her eyes bright with a mix of exhaustion, gratitude, and something deeper. She would never forget this night, not the terror, not the rescue, and not the men who had shown her that the sea might be merciless, but justice could still rule its waves. For the first time since she was tossed into the ocean, Emma felt more than survival. She felt strength borrowed from those who had taught her that even in the darkest waters, there were rules. And the SEALs were the ones who enforced them. The white silhouette of the Coast Guard cutter grew larger against the horizon, its deck lights slicing through the night like beacons of authority. For Emma, the sight was almost unreal. She had spent hours trapped between despair and hope, adrift in an ocean that seemed infinite. Now, at last, she could see the symbol of law and order cutting through the dark waters, a reminder that the nightmare was nearing its end. The SEALs didn't relax. Daniels stood firm near the restrained crew, his weapon lowered but still ready. Mason and Torres flanked the prisoners, eyes scanning every twitch, every breath. Ramirez relayed updates into his comms, his voice calm and steady. Bear kept the captured vessel angled to make boarding smoother for the cutter. Cutter closing fast, Ramirez reported. ETA 5 minutes. Emma's stomach twisted. 5 minutes felt both too long and too short. She watched the Coast Guard lights draw closer, listened to the steady hum of its engines, and tried to breathe evenly. She thought it would feel like pure relief, but something heavier settled inside her. The ordeal wasn't over until those men were gone. The leader shifted against his restraints, smirking even as his crew hunched in fear. You think this changes anything? Coast Guard takes us in, but money talks. We'll be free. Daniels crouched in front of him, voice low and dangerous. Money doesn't buy freedom out here. Not tonight. The man tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. Emma recognized it as bluster now, a mask over the fear she had seen creeping in earlier. She clutched her blanket tighter and whispered to herself, he's wrong. They'll never walk free. She needed to believe that. The cutter hailed them through loudspeakers. This is the United States Coast Guard. Prepare to be boarded. Copy that, Bear replied into the radio, his tone professional. Vessel secure. Detainees restrained. Within moments, a smaller Coast Guard launch detached from the cutter and sped toward them, lights blazing across the waves. The roar of its engines drowned out everything else. Emma shielded her eyes against the glare, her heart pounding as uniformed figures approached. The launch slammed against the vessel's side, and a boarding ladder clattered against the rail. Coast Guard officers climbed quickly, their weapons drawn, their movements sharp and practiced. Hands visible. One officer barked. The SEALs didn't flinch. They stepped aside smoothly, maintaining control, but allowing the Coast Guard to take over. Daniels raised his hand briefly in acknowledgement. They're yours. 5 restrained, civilian survivor secured. The officer nodded, his eyes flicking to Emma. She saw a flicker of relief in his expression before his focus returned to the prisoners. One by one, the rogue crew was pulled to their feet and marched toward the launch. Shackles clicked over wrists, boots thudded against the deck, and curses spilled into the night. The leader was dragged last, still sneering, still trying to spit venom. This doesn't end here, he shouted, twisting against the officer's grip. You can't control the sea. Emma's chest tightened, but before fear could take root, Daniel stepped forward. His voice cut through the man's rant like steel. The sea doesn't belong to you, and it never will. The words landed heavy, silencing even the other prisoners. The leader jerked his head toward Daniels, but whatever defiance had been left in him drained as he was shoved into the waiting launch. Emma sagged against the railing, exhaustion rushing through her. Watching the men disappear into the Coast Guard vessel felt like exhaling after holding her breath for hours. Relief flooded her so powerfully that tears spilled before she could stop them. Daniels noticed. He approached quietly, crouching so he was eye level with her. You did well, he said simply. Emma shook her head, her voice breaking. I almost gave up. If you hadn't, you didn't give up, Daniels interrupted. You're here. That's what matters. His words, firm but not unkind, struck her deeply. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt allowed to cry without shame. The Coast Guard officers returned to collect statements. Ramirez handled the technical details, handing over coordinates, logs, and evidence. Mason and Torres provided clear, efficient accounts. Bear remained at the helm, steady as always. Daniels gave his statement with clipped precision, offering only facts. When Emma was asked to recount what happened, her voice trembled. She described the charter turning sinister, the moment the crew had thrown her into the water, the hour she had struggled before the SEALs appeared. As she spoke, her throat tightened, but she pushed through. She wanted it on record. She wanted them remembered as criminals, not shadows who might slip back into the dark. The officer taking notes nodded gravely. "They'll be prosecuted, ma'am. You won't have to face them again." Emma clutched the blanket tighter. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. When the last Coast Guard launch pulled away, carrying the prisoners to the cutter, silence fell over the captured vessel. The SEALs remained vigilant, but the tension in the air had eased. The threat was gone. The ocean stretched wide around them, dark but no longer suffocating. Emma turned to Daniels. "Is it really over?" she asked. Daniels studied her for a moment before answering. "For you, yes. For them, it's just beginning." The weight in his words carried finality. Emma realized he wasn't just speaking about legal consequences. He was speaking about the unbreakable memory of this night, the way these men would never forget that they had been crushed by those who truly ruled the water. The cutter signaled again, ready to tow the captured vessel back to port. The SEALs began their final checks, ensuring nothing had been missed, every detail accounted for. Emma watched them move, still struck by their unity. They never wasted motion, never hesitated. She whispered under her breath, almost to herself, "You're not just soldiers. You're guardians." Daniels heard her, but he didn't respond. His silence was answer enough. As the night deepened and the Coast Guard's lights guided them toward safety, Emma sat quietly at the stern. She stared at the waves, remembering the terror, the salt water filling her lungs, the desperate whisper of her brother's words, "Don't quit." Now she understood why she had held on. Not just for herself, but because there were men out here, men who refused to let the ocean belong to predators. Justice had been delivered at sea, and she was alive to witness it. The sun rose slowly over the Atlantic, painting the waves in hues of gold and rose. The night's terror had receded, leaving a fragile calm in its place. Emma Carter sat at the stern of the Coast Guard cutter, wrapped in a dry blanket, her hair still damp, her eyes tracing the endless water. She felt every muscle in her body relax for the first time since being thrown into the ocean. Yet her mind raced with memories she couldn't shake. The SEALs had returned to their Zodiac, preparing to leave. Their mission complete, they moved with quiet discipline, their presence almost serene, as if the chaos of the night had never touched them. Daniel stood at the bow, scanning the horizon one last time. Mason, Torres, Ramirez, and Bear carried themselves with that same unshakable calm. They had saved her life, subdued a dangerous crew, and maintained order where the ocean had threatened to consume her. Emma took a deep breath, the salty air filling her lungs. She remembered the first wave that had swallowed her, the fear, the helplessness. She remembered how hopeless it had seemed. And yet here she was alive, safe, and in awe of the men who had not only rescued her, but also imposed justice with a quiet certainty that demanded respect. The Coast Guard crew moved efficiently, securing the rogue vessel and preparing to tow it back to port. The restrained crew remained silent, their bravado extinguished. Emma watched them, feeling a deep sense of closure. They had underestimated the ocean, underestimated her, and underestimated the men who enforced the rules of the water. Daniels approached her finally, crouching so that he was eye level. "You're stronger than you think," he said. His tone was calm, but there was an unmistakable weight behind his words. Emma looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes. I almost didn't make it," she admitted. "No," Daniels corrected gently. "You made it. That's what matters. You fought when everything wanted to drag you under. That's strength." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She thought of her brother's advice, "Don't quit." She realized now that survival wasn't just about holding on. It was about courage, resourcefulness, and trust in those who knew the rules. Trust in her own instincts, and trust in her will to live. The Zodiac's engines hummed in the distance, as the seals prepared to leave. Emma watched them with a mix of awe and gratitude. They didn't linger, didn't seek praise. Their duty was done, and they returned to the shadows of the sea from which they operated, unseen yet omnipresent. She felt a profound respect for their code, their discipline, and the sheer force of their presence. As the Coast Guard cutter picked up speed, Emma allowed herself a moment to reflect on the ordeal. She had been betrayed by strangers, cast into open water, with death looming around every wave. She had faced the ocean alone, battling exhaustion, panic, and despair. And yet, she survived not by chance, but by willpower and by the timely intervention of those who ruled the water. Her fingers traced the blanket around her shoulders. The night's events had left her shaken, but she felt a new sense of resilience forming inside her. Every shiver from the cold, every gasp for breath, every stroke of panic she had fought through, now seemed like a testament to her own perseverance. Hours later, as the cutter neared port, Emma finally allowed herself to speak, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you," she said, addressing the seals now out of earshot, her words carried on the wind. "For saving me. For everything." Though they did not respond, she felt certain that they had heard her. Their work was not about acknowledgement or praise, it was about mission and principle. But she understood, in a profound way, that her life had been altered because of them. The rogue crew would face justice, the authorities would handle the legal aftermath, and Emma would be free to process what had happened. Yet she knew that the lessons of the night, the raw power of the sea, the strength it took to survive, and the indomitable force of the men who upheld the rules would stay with her forever. She thought back to the moment she had floated alone, staring at the endless expanse, wondering if she would ever see another sunrise. The fear had been all-consuming, but it had also forged a clarity. Life was precious, fragile, and fleeting. Survival was not guaranteed, and strength was measured not by what you could take, but by what you refused to surrender to fear, despair, or cruelty. When the cutter finally docked, Emma stepped onto solid ground, feeling the familiar resistance beneath her feet, the reassurance of stability. Reporters and emergency personnel surrounded her, but she barely noticed them. Her focus was inward, digesting the night, the ocean, the courage of the men who had saved her. Daniels and his team watched from the edge of the pier, their presence quiet but commanding. Emma approached, meeting Daniels' gaze. She did not need words to communicate the gratitude, respect, and awe she felt. A nod was enough, a silent acknowledgement of lives saved and lessons learned. As they prepared to leave, Bear caught her eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible thumbs up. Mason and Torres returned similar gestures, subtle and efficient. Emma smiled through her tears. She understood then that this was the way they worked, silent, disciplined, and resolute. And in that silence, she felt the strongest lesson of all. Emma walked away from the pier, the morning sun warming her face. Every step felt heavier with the memory of what had almost been lost, but lighter with the knowledge that she had survived, that justice had been delivered, and that the ocean, though vast and merciless, was ruled by men of unparalleled skill and integrity. She knew she would never forget the ordeal, nor the seals who had rescued her. But she also knew that life would continue, that she would carry the strength and lessons of that night forward. Every wave she encountered, every challenge she faced, would be tempered by the memory of survival, courage, and unwavering discipline. Emma took a deep breath, the smell of salt still clinging faintly to her clothes, and whispered to herself, "I survived. I'm stronger now. And the ocean? It's not mine to fear." She turned to face the horizon one last time, the waves stretching endlessly before her. Somewhere beyond, the seals had returned to their domain, rulers of a vast, unpredictable kingdom. And somewhere inside her, a quiet determination settled. She would never forget that night, never forget the terror, the rescue, and the men who taught her the ultimate lesson, that even in the darkest waters, courage, strength, and principle could prevail. Emma Carter walked forward, her steps steady, her spirit unbroken, carrying the knowledge that she had faced the ocean and the cruelty of men and had survived. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly free.